Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This will basically be my race report for the 2019 Cloudsplitter. I ran the 100 miler. There were 40 registered, 32 started, and just 23 of us finished to get the finisher's medal. At the pre-race meeting, the race director had a little bit of bad news for us. There was a glitch and they would have to mail out finishers' buckles. The Cloudsplitter ran on October 12th, starting at 8 a.m. It ended officially at midnight on Sunday, October 13th. Final finisher came in about a half hour before that. Today in the mail came this envelope from the race director, Susan Howell. I've been anxiously awaiting this. This is my 14th 100-mile finish of 18 starts. My first DNF was at the Cloudsplitter. I timed out after getting lost quite a few times at about 24 hours with about 63 miles. So before and during every 100-mile race, I like to try and practice something called visual motor rehearsal. Olympic athletes did this many years ago, and what was found was that when athletes went through their performance, their sport in their mind, electronic tools would measure muscles reacting to that, even when it was just being imagined in the mind. Basically, the idea was if you can go there in the mind, you're more likely to go there in the body. So typically I would imagine crossing the finish line at a 100-mile race and really feeling that buckle going in my hand. So of course I had to wait for that feeling quite a few days after Cloudsplitter. But in reality, the more of these races you do, the more you just look forward to the incredible feeling of crossing the finish line, especially if you can finish the race really strong with some kind of negative split type miles towards the end. Anyways, it's time to open up this package. I think Cloudsplitter has one of the more gorgeous buckle designs out there, and it's been 4 years in the works for me trying to earn one. And there it is. Let me get that shiny plastic off of there. She's a beauty. Here's what I've been doing with all my past 100-mile buckles and a couple of others. Here's where this one's gonna end up. Okay, so this report will really just kind of ramble around. I'm not gonna get into my pace at a certain aid station. I don't even know, but I just want to talk about the race in general and how my experience went in the Norton, Virginia area and on the High Knob Mountain. Probably the biggest news for the Cloudsplitter 2019 was that the Speed Goat came all the way from Utah, Carl Meltzer, and of course won it. It was his 21st year of winning an ultra, at least one ultra per year. That streak is alive, and it was his 41st 100-mile race win. Nobody's come close to that. He is the winningest 100-mile racer on the planet. And the way the course was laid out, us slower runners, I got to see him at least 3 times out on the course after the gun. People said if you blink, you miss him, and that was pretty close to it. At one point, I was cruising down a hill, feeling really good, smiling, and he was hiking up a hill. So that's probably the only time in my life I'll be going a little bit faster than Carl. About the course, it was the 6th annual running, and the first 3 years of the race were held out of Elkhorn City, Kentucky, on the Pine Mountain Trail. So the trail basically was on the border of eastern Kentucky with, I believe, Virginia. And it had over 25,000 feet of climb. That course was rated a 5-5, a 40-hour event. They don't go any higher than that. So the toughest race I had ever run before this was the Superior 100, a very difficult race, ranked 4-4. Now, talking to people about the newer course, this was the 3rd year. Cloudsplitter's been run out of Norton, Virginia, on a mountain that's very similar to the Pine Mountain Trail, but it's just shy of 25,000 feet of climbing. So technically, I don't know if the course is still a 5-5 rated. If it's not, it would be a 5 and a 4.9 if there were any such thing. But talking to Rob Apple, who was working on his 756th ultra marathon. That's not a mistake. 756. Rob was there working on trying to run the 100K. And he's run all 6 of the Cloudsplitter races. He's very familiar with the trails in the region. And he said emphatically that the new course is tougher, it's harder, it's a lot more technical. And I found that to be true. Honestly, I have absolutely no idea how Carl could have run that course in just over 21 hours. So many boulders and rocks, and boulders and rocks that were shifting and moving, and steep climbs, and it was pretty relentlessly hard. Worth noting, Carl is 51 years old, so I can't blame my slowness solely on age. My primary mantra for this race was namaste, as in namaste my ass on the course. Course marking to course marking, that was the mantra the whole race. I knew that the course would be marked better than the old course was the year I was there. It was just a little bit an easier course to navigate, but it wouldn't be marked as well as, say, the Mohican 100 with flags everywhere. Where you pass one flag, you can see the next flag. Markings were more sparse. Definitely a lot of runners got off course and put in some bonus miles. Fortunately, my focus worked. I did get off course very briefly quite a few times. I'm going to guess at least 5 or 6 times. We start in a farmer's market building that used to be, I guess, a car dealership. And so you can see the mountain right there. Norton's a small city, smallest city in Virginia. And we run almost 8 miles, mostly up to the top, High Knob Tower, basically the peak of High Knob Mountain. And from there, we go out quite a few miles and then come back to High Knob Tower. And then the 100-mile people go back out that same trail almost to the end of where we went before and come back. So at that point, I believe we're at about 64, 65 miles. And most people have the night run behind them by then. So with the 25K runners, the 50K runners, the 100K runners, and then us 100-milers, there's a good amount of interaction with the other runners, their crew, spectators, volunteers. Definitely a lot of energy out there. And the ending of the course is out to a place called Devil's Fork, also known for a feature called the Devil's Bathtub. And basically it's an out and back with a very difficult loop at the end of it. From the low end of Devil's Fork, where the aid station is, the furthest out aid station is, on that section. It's mostly uphill back to High Knob, and that is a tough grind for several of us. By the time we got back up to High Knob Tower, the High Knob aid station, for our fourth visit, we were definitely headed into a second sunset. Luckily, in my case, I kind of got a second wind and really busted butt down that mountain. Gained at least an hour back, so I finished under 37 hours. Beat the goal by over 3 hours, which I was thrilled with that. It's always fun chatting with the other runners out there. Fortunately, I was at the same pace with a few others at times, although I ended up doing most of my night running solo. One of the guys I was talking with after the first visit to High Knob had just DNF'd at the Barkley Fall Classic due to having to go to the hospital to pass a kidney stone after 22 miles. So it's harder to find a better Barkley Fall Classic story than that. Another young lady I was chatting with, pretty much within about a minute of talking to her, I realized that her race report blog from the year before, from 2018, was the first one that I read. It was very long, and it actually scared the hell out of me. But Steph's race report definitely inspired me to train harder and get it done, and it was great to see her come back for a second finish. I ran the entire race, Cloudsplitter, the almost 37 hours, in this pair of Huarache style sandals, and I had no backups. There were no other shoes in any of my drop bags, no plan B. I had a lot of confidence, obviously, in these. And then, of course, ran with poles in hand the entire 36 hours and 50 minutes. I don't think of myself as antisocial, but I did run the entire race, my usual, no pacer, no crew, no shoes, only one sock for the final 25 miles on one foot. I had a toe injury. And also the usual no meat, no eggs, no dairy, which can be a bit of a trick in Virginia. The city of Norton was pretty amazing and welcoming to us. In the mail, after registering for the race, we got a letter from Fred, the city manager. Very helpful information, and he was obviously super excited to have all of us runners coming to his city. And after getting to the parking lot there at the start-finish area, pre-race day, I hopped out of my van. I overheard a guy from Norton welcoming another Ohio runner to the race. It was a buddy, Matt, and there was Fred welcoming runners to the parking lot before they even got to the farmer's market. He took lots of pictures before, during, and after the race. He was helping me with my drop bags after the race. Early in the race, he was out there on the course taking photos, posting them on his website, Explore Norton. He was everywhere, and it was pretty impressive. And it wasn't just him, it was lots of staff people from Norton, lots of city people, volunteers, just residents interested in the race. Down in the Devil's Fork area, I had stashed some gear in the woods, and when I picked that stuff up on my way back out, I inadvertently left my best headlamp behind, like a $150 Ultra Spire waist belt lamp. And so I told the race director about that at the finish line, and she brought over a fellow named Kyle. Kyle was going to be doing some course sweeping a day or two after the race ended. And so I gave him, he listened very intently to exactly where the rusty barrel was, where I covered up my gear with leaves. And sure enough, a couple days, a day or two after I got home from Norton, I get a text from Kyle with a photograph of my headlamp, which he is going to mail back. So I was even invited to stay inside and sleep on a cot at the farmer's market. I already had my van set up with a trifold mattress, and I just slept in my van. Just the fact that they made the offer was pretty incredible. There's some southern hospitality that I experienced, so if you go there, hopefully you will as well. Just today, I heard back from one of the aid station captains at the course, the Devil's Fork region of the course, and he was all ears, looking for more ideas. Well, wanting to know what kind of sandals I was wearing, but also interested in plant-based food options for the runners. One of the ways I get geared up mentally while I'm tapering to go run these tougher races is just to sit back and watch a favorite movie. For this race, a couple days before I drove out, I watched The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, and just absolutely love the humor, the cinematography, the storyline, all of it. And so anyways, after I got to Norton, checked in at the farmer's market, went to try to find a first come, first serve campsite at the Flag Rock campground. Got a great site, drove over to the overlook for that Flag Rock area, bumped into a friend that I'd met at Cloudsplitter 3 years before. Kind of nice to park in a place like that and have somebody call your name out. And then after that, I drove up to the High Knob Tower, which is a narrow, very windy, very steep road. And out of nowhere, and it happened so fast, a young man on a long skateboard just came whipping around a corner. Thought I might hit him head on. He cruised by my van. I gave him the thumbs up. He clapped his hand real loud a couple times, evidently to signal the skateboarder that was right behind him. So after he came through, I looked in the rear view mirror and watched as he leaned all the way down to the ground, put one hand out on the road, and just went screaming around a tight, steep corner, just like the stunt double for Ben Stiller did in the movie Secret Life of Walter Mitty. It was amazing. It blew my mind. The coincidence of it, the timing of it, I don't know. It just made me feel like I was in the right place at the right time. It just seemed like more than a coincidence. So after he came by, then another slower guy on a skateboard with I think it was a pickup truck behind him, came by me. And when I got up to the tower area to park, to go up to the observation deck, a fellow pulled in behind me. I could tell he was obviously a runner. He was pacing a 100-mile runner the next day. And I asked him about the skateboard. He said, yeah, I almost killed that guy. So at the pre-race meeting then, the city manager spoke, race director spoke, the mayor spoke. They had a wildlife expert come in and speak to us. I was most intently interested in everything they had to say about course markings. So the meeting went really well. I got back up the mountain. While I was getting ready to go to sleep up at the Flag Rock campground, I heard this shriek coming from the valley down. We were up on a ridge line, and it had to be a big cat. I don't know if a bobcat can make that loud of a sound. It was definitely not a house cat, but this was such an intense growl. I just kind of relaxed and went to sleep, imagining it was a mountain lion trying to scare off a bear. I was there in part for a challenge that would truly take me to the edge, but also for a pretty intense wilderness experience. One of my mantras is, the universe will correspond to the nature of your song. And the idea there is, if you're really focused on something, you really, really want it, the universe just sort of effortlessly puts everything into place to help allow it to happen. And I was just kind of getting that feeling more and more with everything I was seeing and hearing and sensing in the Norton area. So 8 a.m., the real gun goes off, and an actual rifle or musket, and we run out of Norton. The police and fire are leading us out with lights flashing to the mountain, and pretty quickly we're onto the trail. It was cool, cloudy. We had rain off and on for I don't know how many hours, but fortunately the sun did come out. The skies cleared, it warmed up a little bit, sun came out just as I was at a beautiful mountain lake. So running on this beautiful, perfect trail with mountain laurel all around. In fact, it kind of became a mountain laurel tunnel, a green tunnel by this beautiful lake. It's just spectacular. One of my personal goals that probably hardly anybody else in the world could possibly care about was I wanted to be the first person to ever run the entire course, the 100K or the 100 miler, but I did the 100 miler in these Huarache style sandals. On the first night, Saturday night, I think maybe I was getting a little overconfident, running maybe just a little bit too fast, thinking maybe I could do it in 33 to 35 hours, and a rock rolled underneath my left foot. My left pinky toe snagged on something. It felt like I either pulled the toe way too far out, possibly tearing a tendon, maybe I had a broken bone, but it hurt. I was concerned. And after a couple minutes of looking at it, I was relieved to see a little bit of blood. It turned out it was a laceration under the toe, but not too bad. Fortunately, it didn't go very deep, and I was able to just carry on. Any kind of injury from not having a full shoe on has been extremely rare, pretty much non-existent. I finished this one again blister-free. So I've never really had a blister after running a 100-mile race. A little bit more on Norton. Coming into the finish in the dark, we come out and run down the mountain on a road a little bit after we hop off the trail, and down towards where there might be some traffic, there was this huge billboard-sized, lit in red lights with flashing warning, watch for runners on the road. There were cones all over the place, signs. It was pretty much impossible to get lost. Vehicles were definitely warned of our possible presence, and heading in, I noticed a couple people kind of watching me come in. I found out when I got back to the finish they were the spotters. So they knew when we were coming. They kept a close eye on it. As in spite of running the race solo with no pacer, no crew, I felt like we were, they knew where we were, and they were keeping a really close eye on our safety. The later I got into the race, after 70, 80 miles, I was hearing more stories. A couple of 100K runners got off course. I heard the aid station folks talking about how they were found on the side of a road sleeping. I heard the story of unfortunately one lady. There were only 3 female entrants to the 100-mile race. One of them had a crash on the first big section of the course, the Scout Trail, and had suspected to have broken some ribs. So this was just an absolutely challenging, brutal course. This year's race, we were blessed with a gorgeous full moon overhead for the weekend. Just by a chance at the Canal Corridor 100 miler back in July, I had a full moon, and whatever it takes to stay awake, especially when you're by yourself out there, at the Canal Corridor, I had this Alicia Bridges song come into mind, her 1978 disco hit, I Love the Nightlife. So singing that stupid song kept me smiling and laughing through the witching hour, through the mountains. At my third and final visit to the Bark Camp aid station, sometime middle of the night, it was very dark and cold. Sitting at the campfire, I remembered I had a whole avocado in my drop bag, but no knife. So the aid station person got me a steak knife. And I remember feeling kind of primal as I was just gnawing away at this avocado. which wasn't quite as ripe as it ideally would have been. And there were probably at least 4 or 5 local people huddled around the fire, and I just kind of felt like a crazy man in sandals gnawing away on this raw avocado, and with a steak knife in my mouth, and explaining to some of them about people that I knew who had healed stage 4 cancer with an all plant-based diet, and how others had healed type 2 diabetes with the same diet. So I was kind of explaining to people who didn't know much about nutrition and plant-based foods. Generally, anytime I can have an opportunity to explain to people the benefits of certain nutrition ideas or minimalist footwear, I'll usually do that instead of worrying about my time. I'd rather give up the pace in the race and maybe have a positive impact on somebody. But all in all, my personal race couldn't have gone much better. I made it 36 hours and 50 minutes without ever poking a hole in either of my feet with my carbide tipped trekking poles. Only had a few stumbles. I really only remember one time almost falling down, but basically I caught it with my hands and never made it all the way to the ground. I just never hammered the ground once on that course. And there were just so many really dicey stream crossings with lots of slippery boulders. There were places where it was really hard to tell where the trail even went. Hallucinations. I didn't have any spectacular hallucinations, but over towards the Devil's Fork Gate area, really both ways, I was seeing things that weren't there. At one point I looked down and saw a piece of gravel that turned into a teddy bear. Coming up the hill out of Devil's Fork area up to the gate, I thought I saw my wife up there, and I knew she was hundreds of miles away. In fact, she was driving from Mississippi to Ohio, so I was over here. She was driving from down here to up here. Didn't make any sense that she would try to surprise me, but I kept seeing her up there because there were some orange or red leaves on the trail ahead. Our team, neighborhood colors where we live are orange and black, and I saw my wife in orange and black there to surprise me and cheer me on at the race. And so I guess I let the hallucination just turn into a kind of a motivational fantasy while I was out there. But that was kind of fun. Just noticing how the mind was dreaming while my eyes were open and I was moving through the forest. So while I was attempting to be the first person to run the race in sandals, first place in the non-existent sandal division. But what I ended up doing was being the oldest finisher at 57 at this year's Cloudsplitter, and then realized yesterday, I guess, that I qualified for the UTMB. I'm up to 11 points just for this year, and not sure I can afford to go do that, but kind of exciting just to know that I qualified. It's kind of like in the ultra world, I guess it's sort of like qualifying for Boston. The Cloudsplitter 100-miler gets a runner, the finish gets a runner 6 UTMB points, and I believe the 100K gets them 5. So closing up here, really excited to have earned this buckle. I don't think I would have bet money on me finishing the race. I have these skinny frog legs and no trail beard, no badass tattoos, but over the past 4 years have learned how to become a mountain runner. Unlike at the Superior 100, where I carried a camera and took lots of pictures and video of the course, I knew that to get this buckle, I had to stay in more of a business mode the whole time. So I had my cell phone, but I hardly ever got it out because there's no reception. And in fact, I ditched it before the final 12 miles anyways, just to be lighter. So that's why you're not going to see lots of pictures from the course and video of the trails. I just didn't get any. If you're still watching, I can hardly believe it. Thanks for tuning in. Cheers.